The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of the Bradford nursery, painting golden patterns across the floorboards. Birds chirped outside, and the scent of fresh lilacs drifted through the open window. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, a perfect afternoon. Sophie Bradford leaned over the crib and brushed a curl from Ella's forehead. Next to her, Ethan slept with his thumb tucked against his cheek, the faintest smile playing across his lips. Sophie pressed her lips to their heads, whispered, "Mommy loves you," and pulled the door shut gently behind her. It was 1:03 p.m. She poured herself a cup of tea downstairs, glancing at the clock in the kitchen. Jack was late again. The meeting he said would end at noon had stretched into early afternoon. Sophie didn't mind. She cherished these rare quiet moments when the twins slept and the house was still. At 1:47 p.m. she heard it, an odd creak from upstairs, not loud but sharp enough to make her freeze. A familiar maternal intuition kicked in. Something was wrong. She called out, "Ella! Ethan?" even though she knew they should still be asleep. Her feet moved on their own, racing up the staircase 2 at a time. When she opened the nursery door, the world stopped. The room was still. The mobile above the crib slowly spun in the light breeze. Toys lay untouched. The blankets were slightly rumpled, but the crib was empty. Both of them were gone. Gone. There was no scream, no broken glass, no signs of forced entry, just silence and the chilling weight of absence. Within 10 minutes, the house was swarming with neighbors and local police. Jack arrived, breathless and pale, rushing to Sophie's side. "They were just here," she kept saying over and over. "They were just here." Detective Hannah Moore arrived by 3 p.m. She was the kind of investigator who noticed everything and spoke little. Her eyes swept the room, noting every detail, the unlocked window, the unscuffed door, the fact that the baby monitor had mysteriously shut off around 1:20 p.m. She questioned Sophie gently but thoroughly. "Did you hear anything unusual?" "No." "Was anyone expected today?" "No." "Has anything like this ever happened before?" Sophie looked horrified. "God, no." Jack was less composed. He paced the hallway, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered to himself, "This doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense." The town of Ashford hadn't seen anything like this in decades. People left casseroles at the Bradfords' doorstep. They organized search parties, handed out flyers, called radio stations. Helicopters scanned the woods. Dogs combed the riverside. Every inch of the area was searched. Nothing. No footprints. No witnesses. No ransom note. Detective Moore set up a command post in the Bradford home. She reviewed every camera feed in the neighborhood, every delivery schedule, every noise complaint, every phone call. She didn't sleep. Neither did Sophie. The days turned into weeks. The nursery remained untouched. Sophie refused to change a single thing. "I want it to be exactly the way it was," she told Moore. Her voice cracked from exhaustion. "In case they come back." But as time passed, hope thinned. Leads dried up. Tips became desperate guesses. One morning, Sophie found herself staring at the crib, running her hand along the worn wooden rail. She whispered, "Where did you go?" The question echoed, unanswered. Detective Moore wasn't ready to give up. She knew something was missing, some thread left loose. She stayed late into the nights, reviewing her notes, searching for a pattern, anything to break through the suffocating silence that followed the disappearance. But even she had to admit, it was like the twins had vanished into thin air. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This story only gets stranger from here, and what they eventually found inside that crib 14 years later will leave you breathless. The second day brought rain, heavy, relentless, drenching everything it touched. Searchers still combed the woods, feet sinking into mud, voices hoarse from shouting the twins' names. Detective Moore stood under the nursery doorway, notebook in hand. She had spent the night going over every detail of the case. Again, something felt off. Not just the disappearance, but the subtle cracks in the Bradford story. Jack's alibi was flimsy. He claimed he was at an architecture firm meeting until 2 p.m., but no one could confirm when he arrived or left. His phone records showed a 17-minute gap between calls around the time the twins vanished. Moore questioned him again. "Where exactly were you at 1:30? Jack blinked. "Still at the firm. Can anyone confirm that?" He hesitated, then said, "I think so. I was in the break room. Maybe no one saw me." It wasn't enough. Sophie's recollections, on the other hand, were vivid, but fragmented. She insisted she'd heard a creak upstairs at 1:47. When Moore checked the old floorboards, one plank near the window made that exact noise. Sophie also remembered a strange sound, just after that creak, like a sharp mechanical pop. "A toy?" Moore asked. "No," Sophie said, eyes distant. "It sounded wrong, like metal snapping. There was no broken lock, no forced entry, no footprints on the sill. Still, the window had been open a crack. Outside neighbors grew uneasy. A few offered comfort, others whispered. Some hinted the Bradfords had enemies. "They weren't exactly warm," said one neighbor. Jack especially, kept to himself, always looking over his shoulder. Moore pressed on. She talked to babysitters, delivery drivers, even landscapers who worked in the area that week. Nothing. But one thing gnawed at her. A gardener mentioned something odd. 2 days before the twins vanished, he'd seen a white van idling outside the Bradford home for nearly 20 minutes. No markings, tinted windows. He assumed it was a contractor, but now he wasn't sure. Moore requested street cam footage from nearby intersections. Most weren't working. One, however, caught a blurry image of a white van turning onto the Bradford street at 12:59 p.m. It left 15 minutes later. She had the frame enhanced, still too blurry to read the plate. Meanwhile, Sophie descended into something deeper than grief. She stopped eating. She paced the house at night. She started wearing Jack's old hoodie, sometimes forgetting to shower. When Moore returned to check on her, she found Sophie standing in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. "They're still here," she whispered. Moore blinked. "What do you mean?" Sophie turned, eyes wide and red. "I can feel them. I don't know how, but I just do." It wasn't madness, it was something else, a conviction. Moore didn't dismiss her. Sometimes, in the absence of evidence, all you had was instinct. Jack, on the other hand, began pulling away. He stopped attending media briefings. He avoided the detectives. When Moore asked to see his work laptop, he hesitated. "It's got private client files," he said. She pressed. He relented. A quick forensic scan revealed deleted folders, one labeled Project Umbra. The name meant nothing to the firm he worked for. Moore flagged it. She had a feeling she'd need it later. Back outside, rain turned the search into chaos. The scent dogs lost trails. The river swelled. Equipment malfunctioned. People began to lose hope. The media turned brutal. Headlines read, "Perfect Family, Perfect Lie," and "Where are Ella and Ethan?" Photos of the twins plastered every TV screen, every gas station corkboard, every phone screen in town. Moore kept the pressure on. She interviewed Jack's colleagues. One said something that made her pause. "He used to draw strange things," said a junior architect, "like circles with symbols, like occult stuff." Moore asked for copies. He provided napkin sketches. Some matched old pagan diagrams. It was thin, circumstantial, but enough to raise alarm. Back at the station, Moore locked herself in her office and studied every angle. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 4 days. Her mind spun with theories, a kidnapping ring, a personal vendetta, something darker. But none of it answered the most pressing question. How did 2 toddlers vanish without a sound in broad daylight from a locked home? Outside, the rain slowed. But inside the Bradford house, nothing moved. And in the heart of the nursery, the crib remained perfectly still. By the 4th week, hope began to rot. Flyers once bright with promise faded in the rain. Search parties dwindled. The media moved on. The Bradford case slipped from national news to whispered urban legend. Detective Moore stood in front of her captain's desk, arms crossed, exhaustion etched into every line on her face. "You've done all you can," he said gently. "We're reallocating the task force." She didn't respond. She just stared, unblinking. That afternoon, her badge was reassigned. Officially, the case was cold, but Moore couldn't let it go. Even after returning to robbery detail, she spent her nights rereading transcripts, mapping timelines, reviewing the van footage. There were too many unanswered questions. Meanwhile, the nursery remained untouched. Sophie refused to pack anything. 14 identical outfits hung in the closet. Stuffed animals sat neatly arranged. A faint scent of baby powder lingered in the air. Each morning she opened the nursery window, as if waiting for laughter to drift in. Jack avoided the room altogether. He slept in the guest bedroom. Sophie didn't ask why. She no longer asked anything. They had become strangers living inside the same house, tied together only by the echo of loss. On the first anniversary, Sophie lit 2 white candles. She placed them on the windowsill beside the crib. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're just lost." She spoke less and less to friends. Most stopped calling. The neighbors pitied her, then avoided her. The community's sympathy had dried up, replaced by discomfort. More visited when she could. They sat in silence. Sometimes they drank tea. Sometimes they said nothing for an hour. But Sophie always ended with the same sentence. They didn't just vanish. Jack, on the other hand, was changing in quieter, more dangerous ways. He came home later. His eyes were bloodshot. He snapped at simple questions. Sophie once found him in the basement, staring at old blueprints under a single bulb. When she asked what he was doing, he just said, "Trying to make sense of things." Then he started locking the door behind him. Moore grew concerned. She petitioned the station to reopen the case. Again, denied. She requested surveillance of Jack. Rejected. But she didn't stop watching. 2 years passed, then 5. By year 7, Moore had retired early. The stress had taken its toll. But she kept the Bradford case file in a private lockbox. Every birthday she sent Sophie a card. No words inside. Just 2 pressed lilies and the date. Sophie kept them all. By year 10, Jack filed for separation. "I can't live in a grave," he said. Sophie said nothing. She signed the papers. The house remained hers. She couldn't bear to leave it. It was the only place the twins had ever known. The nursery door stayed shut now. Not locked, but sacred. A capsule of suspended time. Then, in the 12th year, the neighborhood began to change. Younger families moved in. The community newsletter made no mention of the Bradford case. It became a ghost, buried under new sidewalks and fresh coats of paint. Only Sophie remembered. Every night she checked the window. Every night she listened. Then, in the 14th year, the notice came. Property taxes had doubled. Insurance rates climbed. Her inheritance had dried up. The house had become a burden she could no longer carry. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, fingers tracing the edge of the crib. "I never wanted to leave," she whispered. But she had no choice. She listed the house. Within weeks, it sold. She held one final yard sale, laying out memories on folding tables. Most people were polite. Some didn't realize who she was. A few did, and kept their distance. One young couple, Matthew and Lisa Harper, stopped in front of the crib. "It's beautiful," Lisa said. "Handcrafted?" "Yes," Sophie said. "It's very old." They smiled. She smiled back. For the first time in years, her face softened. They bought the crib. Sophie helped them load it into their truck. As they drove away, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "Take care of them." Then she turned, walked back inside, and shut the nursery door for the last time. Matthew and Lisa Harper had been searching for the perfect crib for months. They were expecting their first child, a girl, and had fallen in love with the charm of antique furniture. The moment they saw the worn, honey-colored wood and delicate carvings, they knew they'd found something special. They brought it home that same afternoon, carrying it piece by piece into their freshly painted nursery. The room smelled of lavender and new beginnings. Matthew laid out the hardware, and Lisa sat cross-legged nearby, skimming the baby book. "I love that it has a story," she said. Matthew smiled. "It'll have a new one now." As he fitted the sides together, he noticed something strange. One of the panels didn't align. He tugged at it gently, expecting it to snap into place. Instead, it gave way with a soft click. Behind the panel, wedged in a hollow groove, was a strip of fabric. Small, delicate, aged. Frowning, he pulled it free. It was a child's pajama sleeve, pale pink with tiny elephants. The fabric was scorched at the edge, as if singed by fire. There was something else folded inside. A note. Tiny, crooked handwriting in purple crayon read, "We're still here." "Please don't go." Lisa stared at it, heart pounding. "Is this a prank?" Matthew shook his head. "No one's touched this crib since we bought it. It came from that woman's house, remember? Sophie Bradford." Lisa Googled the name, hands trembling. The search results hit like a hammer. Twin babies vanish in broad daylight, mystery unsolved. Their hearts dropped as they read about Ella and Ethan, the endless searches, the unexplained clues. Lisa's breath caught when she saw the nursery photo. It was unmistakable. The same crib. They called the police. The responding officer barely glanced at the note before passing it to his superior. Within hours, the crib was impounded, and the Harpers were giving statements at the station. Detective Hannah Moore, now retired, was at home sipping coffee when her phone rang. She hadn't thought about the Bradford case in months, years even. "This is Moore. Detective, it's Sergeant Keller from Ashford. I think you're going to want to see this." She drove through the night. When she saw the note, her hands shook. "Where exactly was this found?" she asked. "In the inner groove of the crib rail. It was hidden, very carefully." She pressed the note between gloved fingers, eyes scanning each letter. The handwriting was small, deliberate, the kind a toddler might write, with help. But what truly chilled her was the phrase, "We're still here." Moore had spent years building theories, and most of them ended in grim conclusions. But this was different. It suggested presence, awareness, survival. She asked for the crib to be returned to the evidence lab and ordered a full forensic sweep. Lisa and Matthew watched from the doorway of the nursery, arms around each other. They hadn't slept since discovering the note. "Do you think those kids are still alive?" Matthew asked. Moore paused. "I don't know, but if they are, they've been trying to reach someone." The lab results were slow but thorough. The cloth fragment contained traces of soot and a faint residue of copper. The crayon ink was standard, but the paper was unusual, aged far beyond 14 years, as though time had warped it. There were fingerprints, but none matched anyone in the system. Moore contacted Sophie Bradford. She answered on the second ring. "Sophie," Moore said softly. "They found something from the crib." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "What?" "A note, in crayon, hidden in the wood." Sophie began to cry. "I told you," she said. "I told you they were still here." Moore met her the next day. They stood side by side in the police archive room, the crib placed under a pale light. Sophie reached out and touched the wood. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Ella, Ethan." Moore didn't interrupt. She was already forming new questions, new paths. Someone had written that note, someone had hidden it, and someone had known that someday someone else would find it. It was not over, not even close. Detective Moore wasn't the type to believe in the extraordinary. But the note changed everything. It reopened doors in her mind she'd spent years trying to shut. And it led her somewhere she hadn't dared go before. The past Jack Bradford had kept hidden. She returned to the old case files, this time with sharper eyes and a stronger resolve. She started with Project Umbra, the deleted folder from Jack's work laptop all those years ago. The station's digital archive still contained fragments recovered during the original forensic scan. Most were scrambled, but one document survived intact, a scanned page from a book titled Orbis Obscura. The image showed a circle filled with intricate markings, surrounded by Latin phrases. Moore recognized the same symbol from the child's note, the one burnt into the edge of the pajama sleeve. She dug deeper, tracing the phrase through academic databases and occult forums. One translation repeated across several sources, "To seal what must not age, hidden from the rot of time." She contacted a religious historian in Boston, Dr. Lena Chen, who specialized in esoteric belief systems. When shown the image and the phrase, Dr. Chen went quiet. "This isn't just folklore," she said. "It's part of a ritual found in obscure pre-Christian sects, one that believed time itself could be halted under specific, sacred conditions. Children were sometimes used in these rites, believed to be purer vessels." Moore felt a chill crawl down her spine. She returned to the Bradford house, not as an officer but as an observer. Sophie allowed her inside. The house was stripped of most things now, but the bones were still there. Moore stood again in the nursery. She moved to the window, then the corner where Jack's blueprints had once sat, and there, in the wall's grain, she noticed something she'd missed for years, a seam, barely visible. She tapped it. It echoed, a hidden compartment. Sophie watched from the hallway, eyes wide as Moore pried at the panel until it opened with a dusty sigh. Behind it was a shallow cavity, and inside, a bundle wrapped in old linen. Moore unwrapped it slowly. There were photographs, yellowed and cracked, of hand-drawn circles and symbols in chalk, notes scribbled in Jack's handwriting. One read, "If preserved, they remain whole. The sacrifice is waiting. The key must not break." Sophie trembled. "He was trying to save them." Moore nodded, barely breathing. She took the evidence to a private lab. The ink on Jack's notes matched samples from his office, proof he'd written them. But the last page in the bundle wasn't his handwriting. It was delicate, practiced, feminine. Sophie stared at it, stunned. "That's my mother's." Her voice was small. "She died when I was 19. I had no idea she was involved in anything like this." The new mystery deepened. How had Sophie's mother known of these rituals? How had Jack discovered them? And what had they tried to do? Back at the precinct, Moore reopened communication with the Harpers. Lisa mentioned something odd. While cleaning the metal hinges of the crib, she'd noticed faint grooves inside the bolts. Moore retrieved them and had them scanned. Each bolt contained a unique symbol, 6 in total. Together, they formed the same circular pattern from Orbis Obscura. The crib wasn't just furniture. It was part of something constructed, intentional, a vessel. That night, Moore sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the photo of the twins, Ella's joyful eyes, Ethan's mischievous grin. The note echoed in her mind. "We're still here," she called Sophie. "There's more to this than we ever imagined." Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I remember something." Moore waited. "When I was pregnant, Jack brought me to a place in Vermont. A retreat," he said. "But I remember the people. They wore robes, spoke in Latin. I thought it was some weird wellness thing." Moore's pulse quickened. "Can you find it?" Sophie hesitated. "I think I remember the road." It was a start. And suddenly Moore realized this wasn't a cold case anymore. It was burning again. The evidence whispered of something ancient and careful, something that required belief, sacrifice, and secrecy. And somewhere, in the middle of all that, were 2 children who had never stopped waiting. The road to Vermont curved through dense pine forests and forgotten farmland. Sophie hadn't been there in over 14 years, but memory clung like fog, just enough to guide them. Moore drove, alert to every fork and sign, her eyes tracking Sophie's gestures as she pointed from the passenger seat. "It's up here," Sophie whispered, "after the stone wall." They found it. A crumbling sign half swallowed by vines read, "Equitas Hollow Retreat." The gate stood open, rusted hinges groaning in the wind. No visitors, no staff. Just silence and moss-covered paths leading into the woods. They parked and stepped into the overgrowth, hearts pounding in sync. The retreat was a cluster of wooden buildings, cabins warped by time and neglect. Moore approached the largest one, a 2-story lodge. Its front door had been nailed shut, but the boards had split. Inside, dust floated like ash. Faded tapestries lined the walls. Geometric symbols, some identical to those found in the crib bolts. Candles melted into skull-shaped holders. At the far end of the room stood a dais. Etched into the floor beneath it was the same circular diagram from Orbis Obscura. Sophie's breath caught. "This is it. This is where Jack brought me." Moore examined the structure, snapping photos. In a locked cabinet beneath the dais, she found journals, 5 in total, each bound in worn leather. They were written by different hands, each covering rituals, diagrams, and dates. One name repeated often, Elias Corwin, a leader, a scholar, a believer. The 4th journal included a detailed drawing of a custom-built crib designed to anchor a temporal suspension rite. It was identical to the Bradford crib. Moore turned to Sophie. "They built it for this." Sophie looked sick. "They used my children." But the last page of the journal shifted everything. It described a room, hidden, sacred, used only once. Its location, behind the veil of the child's gate. Moore froze. The nursery. They drove back to the now empty Bradford house. Sophie had handed over the keys to the new owners a month earlier, but Moore pulled strings. The Harpers agreed to let them in, for one day. The nursery was still intact. The Harpers hadn't touched it, believing it felt too heavy. The wallpaper peeled and dust danced in the afternoon light. Moore moved to the far wall, the same one where the hollow panel had been. She knocked along the baseboard, searching. Then she heard it. A soft echo. A section of wall gave way with a gentle push. A door, barely visible, opened inward. The air behind it was cold, stale, untouched. They stepped inside. The room was narrow, low-ceilinged, carved from the bones of the house. Candles long melted, symbols etched in charcoal. In the center, a sunken platform covered by a rotted cloth. Beneath it, 2 small blankets neatly folded. Sophie collapsed to her knees. "They were here," she whispered. "They were really here." Moore scanned the room. It wasn't just a hiding place, it was part of the ritual, engineered, precise. She found another bundle in the corner, a sealed envelope, dusty but intact. It was addressed to J.B. Jack Bradford. Inside was a single page typed, "They are preserved. Do not break the seal. The moment must be chosen. The window is narrow." If undone before the time, decay will claim them. Sophie read it twice, then looked up. He thought he was saving them. Moore's hands trembled. Then where are they now? That question became a drumbeat in her head. She began cross-referencing the journals and Jack's notes, searching for mentions of relocation, contingency plans. She found scattered references to the second cradle and transference before the solstice. The final journal entry, dated 2 days after the twins vanished, included a single sentence: "They have been moved. The vessel remains. The children await." Moore knew now. What happened in that nursery wasn't a kidnapping, it was a transfer. The ritual had been completed, but its outcome remained buried. She and Sophie returned to the lodge the next day. They combed the other buildings. In a stone cellar beneath one of the cabins, they found more symbols and a rusted chain bolted to the floor. A dried handprint marked one wall, small enough to belong to a child. Sophie couldn't bear to go further. Moore pressed on alone. Inside the last room, sealed behind a false panel, she found a chest. It was locked with a complex metal mechanism shaped like the same six-symbol design found on the crib bolts. She didn't open it, not yet. She needed help, clarity, answers. Whatever Jack Bradford had done, it was beyond anything she had imagined, and she was no longer sure if the twins had been victims or something else entirely. Detective Moore knew she was standing at the edge of something she didn't fully understand. The chest in the retreat's hidden chamber remained locked, its cold metal humming with silent warning. The symbols carved into it matched those from the crib. The journals, the ritual diagrams, they weren't ornamental, they were deliberate. She didn't touch it again. Instead, she turned to the one name that had appeared most often in the journals: Elias Corwin, the retreat's founder, the one who had written the ritual's clearest instructions. A deep search revealed that Corwin had vanished nearly a decade ago. But Moore found someone else, his brother Daniel, once involved in the retreat, now living in a care facility outside Albany, labeled mentally unstable, paranoid, forgotten. Moore went alone. Daniel Corwin was gaunt, eyes sharp despite his trembling hands. When she mentioned Equitas Hollow, his breath hitched. When she said Bradford twins, he refused to speak for almost a full minute. Then, in a whisper, he said, "He moved them." Moore leaned forward. "Where?" Daniel's eyes darted. "Not there. That place wasn't safe. He took them to the Cradle House, far north, past the falls." She pushed further. "Are they alive?" He stared straight through her. "Time doesn't work the same, you understand? They were sealed, not dead, not awake, waiting. For what?" "For the breach," he said. "For the undoing." Moore's hands clenched. "Tell me where he took them." Daniel shook his head. "It's not a place. It's a fold. Built like the first one, but buried deeper. You'll need the gate." She pressed. "What gate?" He smiled. "The chest, 6 keys, 1 lock, 1 chance." Moore left shaken. But now she had a direction. She returned to the retreat and contacted a locksmith skilled in restoration and antique mechanisms. Under her supervision, he carefully disassembled the chest's lock. Each symbol turned like a dial. When the 6th clicked into place, the lock hissed softly and fell open. Inside, folded in velvet, was a map, hand-drawn, annotated with Latin phrases, arrows, and symbols. At the bottom, one name: Red Hollow, a remote patch of wilderness in the Adirondacks, marked only by a faded logging trail and the words, "Cradle Site, Sanctum 2." Moore stared at the map for hours. Then she called Sophie. "I found where he took them. They didn't tell anyone else, not yet. It was too strange, too fragile. They packed quickly, knowing the trail might not wait forever. It took them 6 hours to reach the logging road. Snow flanked the trees even in late spring. The forest was dense, the air sharper. They followed the coordinates on foot, guided by compass and instinct. Then, hidden behind a thicket of cedar, they found it. An iron gate buried in ivy. Beyond it, a worn path. They stepped through. At the end of the trail stood a house, stone and timber, sunken into the hillside. Its windows were dark. Vines clawed the exterior like veins. The structure had no visible power, no signs of life. They entered. Inside, the air was stale but warm, as if sealed. The walls bore symbols again, etched in charcoal, stained in wax. Candles lined the corridors, long burned out. At the heart of the house, beneath a spiral staircase, was a sealed door of ironwood. It bore the same 6-symbol crest. Moore used the chest key. The door unlocked with a groan that echoed deep into the earth. They descended. The chamber was vast. Stone walls, high ceiling, the temperature dropping with every step. And in the center, a circular platform surrounded by thin columns. Between them, suspended in some kind of glass-like material, were two small shapes. Children, motionless, breathing. Ella and Ethan. Moore fell to her knees. Sophie walked forward, unable to speak. She reached out, hands trembling, stopping just before the surface of the containment. Tears streamed down her face. They haven't aged, Moore whispered. The ritual worked. But the moment was short-lived. Footsteps echoed above. Someone else was here. The footsteps grew louder, measured, deliberate, heavy. Moore reached for her flashlight, flicked it off, and motioned for Sophie to stay behind her. The chamber's stone walls swallowed every sound except the faint hum coming from the strange glass holding the twins. A figure descended the staircase slowly. Tall, lean, wearing a coat dark as pitch and boots caked with mud. Jack Bradford. His eyes locked on Sophie. Then the children. Then Moore. "I told you not to come here," he said, voice calm, almost mournful. Sophie stepped forward, her voice trembling. "What did you do to them?" "I saved them." Moore kept her distance, eyes trained on his hands. "This was your plan all along?" Jack looked at the twins, his gaze distant. "The world we live in, it decays, breaks, devours. I wanted something better. A place beyond death. Beyond time." "You stole them from their lives," Moore snapped. Jack's jaw clenched. "I gave them eternity." Sophie's voice cracked. "You gave them silence. A frozen prison." Jack took a step closer to the containment column. "You don't understand what's holding them. It's not glass, it's a temporal shell. You open it wrong, they die. You don't open it at all. They sleep forever." Moore narrowed her eyes. "Then tell us how." Jack turned toward her slowly. "You don't just reverse it. It requires balance, an offering. Something must be given back." Sophie's hands trembled. "What kind of offering?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound book, the 6th Journal. He laid it gently on the platform beside the containment chamber. "There's a way," he said, "but it's not safe." Moore opened it cautiously. The pages were filled with diagrams, circle after circle, each variation more intricate than the last. One was marked, "Extraction Risk Level Terminal." Sophie read over her shoulder. "It says the vessel must be weakened gradually. The transition won't be instant. Their bodies might reject it." Moore turned a page. "If delayed too long, the shell calcifies. They'll remain preserved until the container decays." Jack nodded. "That's the window. It's closing." Moore stood. "Then we begin now." Jack raised his hand. "You don't understand. The original circle, the one from the nursery, that was only the first half. This chamber completes it. Without it, the reversal fails." Sophie's voice rose. "So you brought us here to what? Watch them fade away?" "No," Jack said, quieter now. "To help finish what I started." For the first time, Moore saw something real in his expression. Fear. Not of her, not of justice, but of what might happen if they failed. Moore stepped around him. "Show me what to do." They cleared the area around the platform. Jack drew the circle in chalk, hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Moore and Sophie placed 6 candles at the prescribed points. The chamber's temperature dropped. Jack began to chant, Latin phrases from the journal. Moore followed, unsure, her voice joining his in uneven rhythm. Sophie held her breath. The containment shell pulsed, faintly at first, then stronger. Cracks began to form, hairline fractures glowing blue-white. The twins didn't move. Jack raised his voice, sweat beading on his forehead. Moore's heart pounded. The journal's final instruction read, "Reversal requires conduit." Sophie read it aloud. "What does that mean?" Jack turned to her. "You." Sophie froze. "You're the closest tie. Their mother, their anchor. The ritual needs your presence at the center. You must call them." Moore grabbed his arm. "That wasn't part of this." Jack looked desperate now. "It's the only way." Sophie didn't hesitate. She stepped into the center of the circle, knelt beside the glass and placed both hands against it. She whispered their names. "Ella, Ethan, Mommy's here. It's time to come home." The cracks widened. Light spilled from within, flooding the chamber. Then, movement. Ella's fingers twitched. Ethan's chest rose sharply. Their eyes opened, wide and wild, staring into a world they didn't recognize. Sophie gasped. "They're breathing! They're—" And then the light burst. Moore shielded her eyes as a wave of force rippled through the room. The containment chamber shattered into vapor. The twins collapsed into Sophie's arms, alive. But something else stirred behind them, something ancient and angry. The chamber trembled. The vapor left behind by the containment shell shimmered like heat rising from asphalt, swirling unnaturally. Sophie cradled Ella and Ethan, their bodies small but warm, their breathing rapid, confused. Moore helped her lift them, but her attention was fixed on the circle behind them. The light hadn't fully faded. Instead, it twisted, reversing, coiling inward, as though something was fighting its collapse. Jack staggered back. His face was pale. "I told you," he murmured. "It needs balance." From the remnants of the ritual circle, a shape began to emerge. Vague at first, then sharper. Dark, tall, inhumanly thin. It wasn't solid, not fully. More a shadow bound by energy flickering with every second, but its presence was undeniable. Sophie backed away, shielding the twins. "What is that?" Jack's voice cracked. "The seal didn't just preserve them, it guarded the gate. Something on the other side latched on." Moore raised the journal. "How do we stop it?" "There's no ritual for this," Jack said. "This wasn't supposed to happen." The entity stepped forward, though its feet didn't touch the ground. The columns around the platform cracked. The candles snuffed out. And then the twins screamed. Ella clung to Sophie's neck. Ethan trembled, his eyes fixed on the figure. Moore saw something pass between them. A current, a pull. The thing wasn't just feeding off energy, it was trying to take them back. "No," Sophie whispered. "You're not taking them." She stepped between the twins and the creature, her entire body shaking. The entity stopped. Moore moved beside her. "We have to break the circle entirely." She reached for the chalk markings and began smearing them with her boot, disrupting the geometry. Jack shouted, "No! That will unleash it." But it was too late. The moment the last symbol broke, the air tore open with a shriek of pressure. The entity flickered violently, then lunged. Sophie didn't flinch. She held her children and said, "I love you. I'll never let you go again." The shadow stopped inches from her face. Its edges wavered, then receded. The light in the chamber flickered once more. And then, nothing. Silence. The air stilled. The pressure lifted. The platform cracked in half. Jack dropped to his knees. "They were the anchor," he whispered. "Their love. Their mother." Moore didn't wait. She moved to Sophie, checked the children again. Their eyes were focused now, cognizant. They looked not 2 years old, but not 14 either, somewhere between. Their skin was pale but healthy. "They're stabilizing," she said. "Whatever the shell did to their bodies, it's reversing." Ethan spoke first. One word. "Home." It was hoarse, unused. Sophie sobbed, holding him tighter. Moore looked to Jack. He stared at the cracked circle, hollow. "You used them," she said. "And you almost lost them." He didn't answer. Sophie stood. "You stay here. You live with this. We're going home." They climbed back toward the surface, carrying the children in their arms. Jack didn't follow. Outside, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Moore turned once, looking back at the house buried in the earth. The structure was still, but something inside pulsed faintly, as if warning them that not everything had been resolved. They didn't speak on the drive back. The twins slept against Sophie's chest, their breathing soft and even. For the first time in 14 years, the weight in her chest loosened. At a rural medical center outside Albany, Moore arranged a private checkup. The doctors were baffled. No records. No explanation for their sudden appearance or their strange vitals. Slightly elevated, fluctuating, but stable. Their bodies were adjusting. Time was catching up, and fast. Over the next 12 hours, the twins aged visibly. By the next morning, they looked no older than 10, but no younger than 7, as if time was resuming its grip one layer at a time. Sophie stayed by their side the entire time. Moore filed a confidential report, omitting the rituals, the entity, the retreat. She knew no one would believe it, and worse, someone might try to replicate it. The twins were entered into the federal missing persons database as recovered. DNA confirmed their identities. Media interest reignited, but Sophie declined all interviews. The story released to the public was simple. Found safe after a harrowing disappearance. But Moore knew the truth, and so did Sophie. As the sun rose on the third day, Ethan turned to his mother. "Was that thing real?" Sophie paused, brushing his hair back. "It was, but you don't have to be afraid anymore." Ella leaned against her. "Will it come back?" Sophie looked toward the horizon. "Not if we remember what matters." And behind them, a long-forgotten gate sealed itself shut, quietly, finally. The morning light spilled gently into the hospital room. Ella and Ethan sat side by side, holding hands, their eyes wide with a mix of confusion and wonder. The world they had returned to was unfamiliar, but the warmth of Sophie's embrace made it feel safe. Detective Hannah Moore stood quietly nearby, watching the family reconnect. The long journey, the shadows of secrets, the weight of time itself, it was all still fresh. But this moment felt like a fragile beginning. Sophie smiled softly, brushing Ethan's hair back. "We'll take it one day at a time." Outside the hospital, news of the twins' return rippled through the town. Reporters gathered, questions fired like arrows. Sophie declined to comment, choosing privacy over public spectacle. The story told was simple and hopeful, a miracle reunion after years of anguish. But beneath the surface, truths remained untold. Jack Bradford was in custody, charged with multiple offenses related to the disappearance. His trial loomed ahead, but Sophie was focused on healing, on rebuilding what had been lost. Moore left the hospital that afternoon, thoughts heavy but hopeful. She knew some mysteries might never fully unravel, but this chapter was closed, for now. Weeks passed. The twins adjusted slowly to their new reality. Their memories were patchy, fragmented by the time suspended around them. Yet their spirits shone bright, curious and eager to reclaim the childhood stolen from them. One evening, Sophie found them in the living room, huddled together over a photo album. "Who's this?" Ethan asked, pointing to a picture of Sophie holding them as babies. "That's Mommy," Sophie said softly. Ella smiled. "We were so small." "Yes, and you always will be special," Sophie replied, holding them close. Moore received a call from the Harpers. The young couple had watched the news with a mix of awe and relief. "We never imagined the crib had such a story," Lisa said quietly. "It was more than a piece of furniture," Moore agreed. As the months unfolded, the Bradford family slowly found peace. Sophie dedicated herself to advocacy, helping families affected by disappearance and loss. The twins grew stronger every day, their bond unbreakable. One crisp autumn afternoon, Moore visited Sophie's home. The nursery, once a chamber of pain, was transformed. Light, laughter, and toys filled the space. Sophie turned to Moore. "Thank you for everything." Moore smiled. "You did all the hard work. I just helped piece things together." As they spoke, Ella and Ethan played nearby, their laughter echoing through the halls. Before leaving, Moore turned to Sophie. "Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, and if you're curious, click the next video on your screen. There are mysteries still waiting to be uncovered." Sophie nodded, eyes shining. "We have a story, but it's ours now." The past was behind them, but the future stretched wide, bright and full of promise.